December 14th, 2023, St. Mary's Hospital, Boston. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked down the sterile corridor, clutching a small bouquet of daisies, my grandmother's favorite. She'd been in the ICU for 3 days after a fall, and I'd promised I'd visit her every evening after work. Room 307. That's what my mother had texted me. But hospitals are mazes, aren't they? Endless corridors that all look the same. White walls, identical doors, the smell of disinfectant mixing with something deeper, fear, hope, grief all blended together. I pushed open the door to what I thought was a room. 407 and stepped inside. But the woman lying in that bed wasn't my grandmother. She was younger, maybe in her early 50s. Blonde hair now matted against the pillow. Pale skin, almost translucent under the harsh hospital lights. Tubes snaked from her arms. A ventilator breathed for her. The rhythmic hiss and click the only sound in the room. And the room itself. God, the room was empty. No flowers on the windowsill. No get well cards taped to the wall. No photographs. No concerned family members. Keeping vigil in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. Just machines. Just silence, just her. I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the handle. This was clearly the wrong room. I should leave. I should apologize to no one in particular and back out quietly. But something anchored my feet to that spot. Maybe it was the way her hand rested on top of the white sheet, fingers slightly curled, taped to the back of her hand, so completely, utterly alone. Before you click away, I need to tell you what happened next. Changed everything I thought I knew about fate, loneliness, and why we meet the people we meet. I found myself walking toward her bed instead of away from it. I set the daisies down on the table beside her, flowers meant for my grandmother, now keeping company with a stranger. And I sat down in that empty chair. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me. David, what are you doing? This isn't your business. This isn't your room, leave. But I couldn't stay with me. This gets unbelievable. I looked at her face, peaceful but not in the way sleeping people look peaceful. This was different. This was absence, like she'd gone somewhere far away and left just her body behind. And then, I don't know why, I started to sing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. My voice cracked. I'm not a singer. Never have been. But my grandmother used to sing that song to me when I was sick as a child, when I'd had nightmares, when the world felt too big and scary. It was the only thing I could think to do. I sang the whole song, all the verses, to a woman whose name I didn't know, in a room I wasn't supposed to be in. When I finished, the only sound was the ventilator. Hiss, click, hiss, click. I stood up, feeling foolish. What was I thinking? I grabbed my coat and turned to leave. Excuse me. A nurse stood in the doorway, a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked confused but not angry. I'm sorry, I stammered. Wrong room. I was looking for my grandmother. I thought this was 307? She finished for me. That's next door. This is 305. Right, I'm so sorry. Were you singing? She asked. Heat flooded my face. Yeah, I don't know why. She seemed so alone. The nurse's expression softened. She glanced at the woman in the bed, then back at me. She is alone, she said quietly. Her name is Margaret Thompson. She's been here for 6 weeks. Severe stroke. She's been in a coma since they brought her in.
6 weeks?
And no one, the nurse confirmed. No emergency contacts on file. No family we can find. No visitors, not one. You're the first person who sat with her who wasn't being paid to be here. Something twisted in my chest. How is that possible, I asked. How does someone just have no one? The nurse shrugged sadly. Happens more than you'd think. People slip through the cracks. Lose touch with family. Outlive their friends. And then something like this happens and she gestured at the empty room. I looked back at Margaret. At her hand resting on that white sheet. Would it be okay if I stayed? Just for a bit? The nurse smiled. I think she'd like that. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Hit that subscribe button because what happens in the next few weeks will restore your faith in human connection. I promise you. That night, I did visit my grandmother. Room 307, she was sitting up in bed, bossing my mother around, color already returning to her cheeks. She'd be fine. She'd be home in a few days. But I couldn't stop thinking about the woman next door. The next evening, I came back to the hospital, but I didn't go to room 307. I went to 305. Margaret was exactly as I'd left her. Same position, same machines breathing for her, same devastating emptiness. I sat down in the chair and I sang to her again. This became my routine. Every single day after work, I'd drive to St. Mary's Hospital. I'd wave to the nurses at the station. They started recognizing me by the third day, and I'd sit with Margaret. Sometimes I sang old hymns my grandmother taught me, Beatles songs, Simon and Garfunkel. Once I even sang Happy Birthday, because I'd found out from her chart that she'd turned 52, while in that coma. 52 years old and no one had sung to her. Other times I just talked. I told her about my life, about my job as a high school English teacher, about my ex-wife Sarah, and how our marriage had crumbled not in some dramatic explosion, but in a slow, quiet erosion of two people who stopped trying, about my two kids, Emma and Jake, who I saw every other weekend but who felt like strangers now. I told her about the loneliness, the kind that sits in your chest even when you're in a room full of people. I know you probably can't hear me, I said one night about 2 weeks in. But I need you to know something, Margaret. You're not alone anymore. Even if you can't feel it, even if you don't know I'm here, you're not alone. The nurses started leaving me alone. They'd peek in, smile, and move on. One of them, Carla, the one who'd first found me singing, told me that Margaret's vitals seemed more stable when I was there. Heart rate a little stronger, blood pressure a little better. Maybe she knows, Carla said. Maybe somehow she knows she's not alone anymore. I wanted to believe that. Christmas came and went. I spent it with my kids. But I visited Margaret on Christmas Eve. I brought a small string of lights and hung them around her window. I read her A Christmas Carol, the whole thing, all in one sitting. My voice was hoarse by the end. Merry Christmas, Margaret, I whispered before I left. New Year's Eve, I was there at midnight. The hospital was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, someone was watching the ball drop on TV. I could hear distant cheering. I held Margaret's hand, something I'd started doing in the third week. Her skin was warm, alive, but still she didn't move, didn't respond. New Year, Margaret, I said. 2024, maybe this is your year. Maybe this is when you wake up and tell me to shut up and stop singing off-key. Nothing. But I kept coming. Don't go anywhere. What happens next I still can't explain. And neither can the doctors. January 4th, 2024. 3 weeks after I'd first walked into the wrong room. I was reading to Margaret from a book of poetry, Mary Oliver, The Summer Day. I'd just gotten to the line, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? When I felt it. Sound, sudden, sharp intake of breath. Her hand. Her fingers moved. Just barely. The slightest twitch against my palm. But I felt it. My heart stopped. Margaret? I leaned forward, gripping her hand tighter. Margaret, can you hear me? Another twitch. Stronger this time. And then her eyelids fluttered. I hit the call button so hard I nearly broke it. Nurse! Nurse! Carla burst through the door, followed by 2 other nurses and then a doctor. They swarmed around Margaret's bed, checking monitors, shining lights in her eyes, calling her name. I backed away, my hand over my mouth, watching. And then, God, I'll never forget this. Margaret's eyes opened. Just slits at first, confused, unfocused, but open. The next 48 hours were a blur of tests, and doctors and specialists all using words like remarkable and unprecedented. And we can't explain this. Margaret's recovery was slow. By the end of that week, they'd removed the ventilator. She could breathe on her own. Her eyes tracked movement, And on January 10th, 6 days after she'd first woken up, she spoke. I was sitting with her, reading the newspaper out loud, something about a snowstorm coming. When I heard it, you. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from weeks of intubation, but it was there. I dropped the newspaper. Margaret? Her eyes found mine, blue eyes, clear now, focused. You kept singing. Tears blurred my vision. You could hear me? She nodded. Just barely. A single tear rolled down her cheek. All of it? Over the next few weeks, as Margaret grew stronger, she told me her story. She'd been alone for a long time. Her husband, Robert, had died in a car accident 20 years ago. They'd never had children. Her only sibling, a sister, had passed from cancer 5 years back. She'd worked as a librarian, quiet work with quiet people, and when she retired, the silence became total. I just disappeared, she said one afternoon. We were in the hospital garden. She'd graduated to a wheelchair. January sun, weak but present on our faces. No one called because there was no one to call. And I didn't reach out because, what was the point? The stroke happened at home. I was alone for 18 hours. Before a neighbor noticed, my newspapers piling up and called the police. By the time they found me, she didn't need to finish. I remember the darkness, she continued. I was trapped. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't open my eyes. But I could hear things, muffled, distant, machines, voices. But they were all clinical, medical, no one talked to me. She looked at me. And then one day I heard singing. This terrible off-key singing. I laughed through tears. Hey now. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, she said. Because it wasn't for the nurses. It wasn't for a chart. It was for me. Someone was sitting with me. Someone cared. She grabbed my hand. You gave me a reason to fight. David, every time you came back, every time you sang or read or just talked, you were pulling me toward the light. I don't know why you stayed, but you saved my life. I shook my head. No, Margaret, you saved mine. And I meant it. Stay with me, because this is where the story takes a turn I never saw coming. You see, I'd spent the last 3 years sleepwalking through my life, going through motions, teaching classes on autopilot, seeing my kids but not really connecting. I'd convinced myself I didn't matter, that I was just here taking up space. But sitting with Margaret, caring for someone who couldn't ask for it and couldn't thank me for it, it woke something up in me. It reminded me what it felt like to be needed, to matter, to love without expecting anything in return. Margaret spent 2 months in rehabilitation. I visited every single day. When my ex-wife asked why I was spending so much time at the hospital with a stranger, I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense. She's not a stranger anymore, was all I said. And she wasn't. Margaret and I talked about everything. Books, music, loss, loneliness, the quiet, terror of realizing you might die and leave no mark on the world whatsoever. I have a daughter, she told me one day in late February. This was news to me. Her name is Rachel. She's 30. We haven't spoken in 7 years. What happened? Margaret's face clouded. I pushed her away after Robert died. I was so consumed by grief I couldn't see what I was doing to her. She tried. God, she tried. But I kept pushing until one day she stopped trying, and I was too proud to apologize. It's not too late, I said. Isn't it? Margaret, you came back from the dead. I think you can make a phone call. It took 3 tries. The first 2 times Rachel didn't answer. The third time she did. I stepped out of the room to give Margaret privacy, but I could hear her voice through the door, crying, apologizing, explaining. When I came back an hour later, Margaret's face was different, lighter. She's coming, Margaret whispered. Tomorrow. Rachel's coming tomorrow. And she did. I met Rachel in the hospital hallway. She was tall, blonde like her mother, with the same blue eyes. Nervous, guarded. Thank you, she said to me. Carla told me what you did. That you've been here every day. That you... I don't know how to say this. That you loved my mother when I couldn't. I didn't do it because I should, I told her. I did it because I needed to. Rachel and Margaret spent hours together that day, crying, talking, holding hands, rebuilding something that had been broken for so long. When I left that evening, Rachel hugged me. She talks about you constantly, she said. She calls you her miracle. She's mine, I replied. Spring came. Margaret was discharged from the hospital in late March. Rachel had invited her to live with her family in Vermont, and Margaret had accepted. Before she left, we had coffee in the hospital. Cafeteria, that terrible coffee I'd complained about so many times while she was unconscious. I'll never be able to repay you, Margaret said. You don't owe me anything. David. She hesitated. What happens now, with us? It was the question I'd been avoiding. I don't know, I admitted. You'll be in Vermont. I'm here, but I'd like to stay in your life, if that's okay. I'd like that too. We hugged goodbye. I watched her get into Rachel's car, watched them drive away, and I thought that was the end of the story. I was wrong. Margaret and I talked on the phone every few days, then every day, then multiple times a day. We texted, we video called. I drove up to Vermont twice to visit. Something was growing between us. Something neither of us had expected. In June, Margaret came back to Boston for a checkup. She stayed with me in my guest room. She was quick to clarify when she told Rachel. But on the second night of her visit, we stayed up until 3 a.m. talking on my porch. About everything and nothing. About second chances and wrong rooms, and how sometimes the best things in life come from our biggest mistakes. I'm falling in love with you, I said. Just like that. No planning, it just came out. Margaret looked at me in the dim porch light. I fell in love with you when you sang to me in the dark, she replied. I just didn't have the words to tell you yet. We kissed, and it felt like waking up, like the whole world had been in black and white, and suddenly, there was color. On October 3rd, 2024, 10 months after I walked into the wrong room, Margaret and I got married. Not in a church, not in some grand ceremony. We got married in that hospital garden where we'd had so many conversations during her recovery. The same place where she'd told me I saved her life and I told her she saved mine. It was just us, Rachel and her family, my kids, Carla and the other nurses who'd cared for Margaret, my grandmother, who was healthy and thriving. The hospital chaplain officiated. Do you, David, take Margaret? I'd imagined my life so many different ways, but never like this. Never with someone I met while she was unconscious. Never with someone I sang to before I ever heard her voice. I do. Do you, Margaret, take David? I do. When we kissed, everyone cheered. Carla was crying. My grandmother was crying. Hell, I was crying. Rachel hugged both of us. You gave me my mother back, she whispered to me. And she gave me a father. People ask us all the time how it happened. How does someone marry a person they met in a coma? And Margaret always says the same thing. He loved me before he knew me, before I could give him anything back. That's not luck. That's not chance. That's what love actually is. We live in a small house now just outside Boston. Margaret volunteers at the library. I still teach. We have dinner with Rachel's family once a month. My kids call Margaret by her first name, but they light up when she's around. Every night before bed I sing to her, not because she needs it to survive, but because it reminds us both that we did survive, that on the worst day in the darkest room when everything seemed lost, we found each other. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that connection still exists in this disconnected world, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel. Share this story, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that it's never too late, that wrong rooms lead to right people, that love finds you in the most unexpected places. Margaret always says I walked into her room by accident, but I don't believe in accidents anymore. I believe in open doors, and the courage to walk through them, even when they're the wrong ones. Sometimes it looks like the end, but it's really just the beginning.